Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have two wonderful people who are going to share with us about MPA preparation. This is in conjunction with ASBDA, and we have Phillip Riggs and Mekel Rogers. So let's start off tonight with the educational goal or why we should take our bands to MPA. Mekel, you want to start?
Yeah. I that's a question I've wrestled with for decades, but in general, I think it's good, especially if you're a young director, to go through the process of figuring out how to get something clean, how to get something musical, and then getting feedback from people who have been there many times before and can give you tips on everything. I had the first, 8 or 9 years that I went, I learned stuff all the time on how to do it better the next time. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, just in general, I think I'm a big comments person, much more than a ratings person. And I mean, most people I think would agree with that. But if you listen to the comments much more than the rating, I think you get more out of it. Um, and just make sure you take it seriously, but not too seriously. I mean, keep it, because there's sometimes you got to you do something musically and you stand your ground and you say, well, wait a minute, I think it should be this way or whatever. But just take in the opinions of other people and know that they have suggestions or things that you might never have thought of before. So anyway, that was a long answer, but there you go.
No, I think it was a very good one. Phillip, how about you?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think for many years I was doing that. I thought there was a single goal, and of course it should be the one that I had, right? But as I've started to do more judging and work with more groups, I think really that's a question that every director has to ask themselves. It's why are we doing this? And then not only do they have to educate their students as to what it is they're going to do, but also their administration, their peers at school, and the parents as to why this is important. For some people, it's if we don't make straight A's and superiors on every sheet, then we weren't successful. And to other people, and I agree with Mekel, I almost wish we just did it for comments only.
Here, here.
That's the thing we do at the School of the Arts basically is that, and then we go up and do a clinic. The Bands of America thing, that really the winning, if you will, is getting selected to go and play in Indianapolis. And then it's not about a number, it's about how do we grow as musicians. So I think each director, though, you have to read your community and you have to know where their priorities are, and you have to start there. If you want the priorities to be something different, you still have to identify what they're looking for and then figure out strategies to get them where you want to be. So that kind of sounds like a cop out, but I really think it gives us the opportunity to make that decision for ourselves, and then we have to decide, how to make it a successful thing. I just said to a younger director the other day in their band room, because they were talking about how important it was and how could they get the students to understand it. And I said, you kind of have to balance that, because particularly to me, like with middle school, we're putting our success or not in the hands of middle schoolers on any given day. It's important, but it's a snapshot of what we do through the whole year. So you have to be careful not to put too much emphasis on it, or all of a sudden all the good things you've done from August to March are supposedly invalid if we don't take that into consideration from a balance standpoint. So I do think it's important. I agree that the commentary really is the primary thing to think about. But I think that, as long as we have ratings, to me, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think literature selection is more important, and not being so concerned about, is it grade 17 masterworks, whatever. I think every band director's blood pressure would be lower. the kids' lives would be happier if we just make sure we're choosing music that they can knock out of the park. I'm not saying don't challenge the students, but do that on your home concerts, but choose music they can knock out of the park. It's a positive day for everybody. And then the rating's a good thing too. But hopefully some of that makes sense as far as ultimately you've got to decide why it's important, and then you've got to make sure everybody in your community, students, parents, etc., buy into that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I know I had to do some education with the parents and the administrators and the staff. Especially with staff, they just thought it was some nice field trip and it was in the
Mm-hmm.
way of what was going on in school and making sure that I guess the easiest thing I found for the population I was with last was um, it was like an EOG for band. And when you translate to their language, they seem to understand a lot better.
I,
Um,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
oh, go
that.
ahead.
That's
No.
if you don't mind, just me commenting on that. I I I understand what people mean when they say it's an EOG for band. I'm always hesitant to do that kind of comparison, for a couple of reasons. But the main reason is because um, I don't want the result to be the focus.
That is
And quite frankly, that's what an EOG is. It's all about the score. It's about the improvement. It's about, and it's also mandatory for every student.
mhm.
Whereas I'm a big proponent of not taking anybody that's not ready to go. And you can't really do that on an EOG. But I understand what people mean when they do that comparison. I would just caution anybody who does that to put a caveat there and say this is an artistic thing. We're trying to be technically as good as possible, but this is about collaboration with each other rather than some type of individual competition or whatever. That's just my personal viewpoint on that.
Somebody else on Friday had said that they would invite an administrator to the sight reading room at MPA, which I thought was really cool. And then your administrator just is like, and they get
Mhm.
it.
Yep,
I thought that was a great idea.
that's a great idea.
Philip,
Yes.
what do you think we can do as far as people's other perceptions of MPA?
Uh, uh, Quite a few groups do like a pre-MPA concert and have guests come in. Usually that's such a short event, particularly with middle schoolers. Obviously, if it's a grade 5 or 6 program or you have multiple groups, it's a little bit longer. But I really encourage people to, do your program just like you would, sight read right on the stage. And then if you have people coming in to make comments for you or whatever, spend another at least 30 minutes. Everybody's already in the same room. We have them there. So 30 minutes to an hour doing a clinic, and it's one of those teachable moments for the parents. And if you can get the administrators there, then they can also see. You can talk about what happens when we go and what kind of comments are going to be made, and then the person you have that's coming in or people coming in can talk about the things they're listening for as the band's performing. So you can get a good rehearsal out of it. They get a performance in, and it's a teaching moment, not just for the kids but for the community.
I love that. I'd never thought about just having a clinic after one of the pre-MPA concerts. So that
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a really another good way to show the parents, show the administrators, what you do and what the kids are trying to accomplish. Um, in trying to keep this balancing act going, um, it's come to our attention more than before. I think with COVID. Um, Kids, I'm seeing students who have a lot more anxiety in the last 5 to 8 years. Um,
Seeing directors with more anxiety.
yes, and MPA can do a real number on your head. And if you guys have experienced that, would you share your perspective on that? Mekel, do you want to go?
I will jump in. Yeah. My therapist says I need to talk about this stuff. So no, I'm honestly, it is. I have a condition called generalized anxiety disorder, and it's gone through, years of being under control, and then all of a sudden something will flare up. We found out that MPA is a trigger for me, just the process of it, and it's not the music itself. I've taken Weddington Middle School to MPA 20 times. We've gotten 20 superiors. Now, I'm not bragging on that. What I'm using that as data to show how important I thought that result was at the time. And I spent the first 3 years at Parkwood trying to figure out how to program, how to clean it up, how to play the game correctly in order to manipulate things to make it so that you could succeed. And that was a major head game that I did not enjoy playing. And once I figured it out and got the first superior, I was like, okay, now you have to do it again to prove it wasn't a fluke. Then the second one comes, well, now you have to do it again to prove that the sixth graders that you started are now eighth graders and can actually do it. Then you have to keep the legacy going, da 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 da. And it's like, listen, it doesn't end until you make it end. And that really plays on your nerves. And for somebody like me who likes to be in control of things, and let's face it, a lot of band directors are control freaks. We are putting, as you said at the beginning, we're putting our performance and in the hands of 14-year-olds, and there are quite frankly just some things that we cannot control. And the funny thing is, we've had everything you can possibly think of go wrong at MPA, and none of it had anything to do with the music. It was all, the bus was late, or somebody's music fell out the window, or whatever. Somebody nosebleed in the sight reading room. You get stopped by the cops on the way home, and yes, that did happen. So it's just one of those things that it just plays on your nervous system completely all the time. And one of the best things that I had done for me was when I was hitting this crisis point. It was about 2004, 2005. I saw a therapist who basically said, I'm telling you right now, stop going. I said, but they said, no, stop going. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go back, but you have to be aware that you can skip a year and the world doesn't end. And that sounds simple, but that took a lot to get through my head. And I actually stayed away for 5 years. I volunteered and helped out and just watched bands for 5 years. And I learned more by watching 40 bands in 3 days, than I did taking my own band. And to tell you the truth, the program didn't suffer. I think I got better as a teacher. And then when I went back because I wanted to go back. And then it was starting to be fun again. And so I always, and I've got a student teacher right now, and one of the things I tell them is, if you don't want to go, don't go, because nothing positive is going to come from that. I think it's a great activity if you want to do it. But if you're pressured to go, if you feel like somebody's judging you, then you shouldn't be going, because that's not going to help anyone, including the kids. And that's my take on that. And it took me getting beat up a lot mentally to come to terms with that. And I'm just hoping that the younger directors that I talk to and all that kind of stuff can avoid that without hitting the wall first, if you get what I'm saying.
Definitely. I know I had years like that, and so much you don't realize how much you're affecting your students. And I'm proud of you that you took a step back and did what was best for you, and ultimately it was probably best for your students. Philip, how about
It
you?
was. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see us change the thinking. It's funny, for many years, the first middle school where I taught, we didn't go just because I didn't think I was ready, and I really didn't think the kids were ready. But we did do the Carowinds thing, and but even doing that, we went for comments, and it was funny. Judges would often make the comment as they introduce themselves. Oh, you're coming for comments. That's just as valid. Da 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 da. We'll try to make good comments for you, and that kind of thing. And it was fine. And then we'd play. And then at the end of their recording, almost without skipping, they would always say, "Oh, this is a great band. I don't understand why you didn't come for comments. We would, if we could change the mindset to understand going for comments is fine. And everybody doesn't have to go for a rating. When we opened Reagan High School the first year, we took the group. We went in grade 4. We did go for a rating. They made us superior. I think they made 1s and 2s and whatever. It was fine. I think the difference being I had been many times before, kind of like Mekel's talking about. I mean, I had been successful in another school. So it was different than, even though it was a new school, it was different than starting somewhere, never having done that. But the second year, we decided to bump up to grade 5 because we felt like we had the people that could do that. We worked toward that. The kids worked really hard, but they probably would have been fine. I don't know that they would have made us superior, but it wasn't going to be tragic or anything. But we just made the decision to go about 3 weeks out to go for comments, because we just felt like that was the right call for that group at that time. And then the next year we went for a rating again, and we made it superior. Everything was, and obviously that program's continued to flourish and has 3 bands now, and it's a successful program. But that particular year, it made sense for us to make that decision. And so, I don't think she would mind me sharing this, but Ann Huff, who was a phenomenal choral director at Enlow High School, almost always went for comments only. And my guess would be probably it was the best choir the panel heard most years. But she was sort of past that, needing the rating, needing the whatever. She just wanted feedback for her kids musically. So, again, I think every director's kind of got to figure out how that fits for them, like Mekel did, and how that fits for the community they're serving, and then decide, how to go about that. But I think we as ASBDA, and also as the band section, we've got to make that more inviting and more acceptable and more valid to go for comments, and that's fine.
Really, really good points from both of you. The other thing that I think is, if we encouraged more bands that don't have perfect instrumentation or don't have the financial support like some programs do, they could really use the whole experience for improvement and taking their kids to do something where they can experience something outside of the band room. And I'd like to see some more of that as well. Well,
if I could just speak to that quickly, Ruth. Again, sort of a nod to the choral section. I'm married to a choral person, so kind of know what a lot of the things they do too. But in they call it small ensemble. It's basically like our solo ensemble, but if they have a chamber group, it's up to 22 students. I think they can take them to the small ensemble, and some of those are their most advanced groups. Madrigal singers or chamber groups or whatever. Particularly with the limited instrumentation or that kind of thing, I'd love to see that be. I know there's the option to do that, but most of the time, solo and ensemble, they're all coming into classrooms and they come in to play in quintets or quartets or solos or whatever. But in conjunction with that, if there was a performance space, an auditorium space where a director could bring a group of 15 that's not perfect instrumentation and do a flex chart, but do it in a more formal setting, I guess that's what I'm thinking, to be able to do that same kind of thing. I think that would be another outlet, and hopefully they would be hoping to grow their program to get to go to the MPA event. And maybe they don't. If that's as big as their school is and that's what they do, then that would be a valid opportunity for them to still have a formal performance for a little bit larger group, not just in a classroom. But does that make sense?
Yes.
Particularly with the flexible arrangements and that kind of thing. So maybe each district could look. I don't think that would be that difficult to do.
No, that sounds like a good project for ASBDA to work on. And I like what I'm hearing is that both of you have been really focused on what's best for the students. And, I know sometimes egos do get in the way, and it's refreshing to hear that. So thank you both for that. So let's get into the how now. For me, I came to the philosophical decision that um, MPA should not be preparation just a certain time of the year. We should be doing all of these things all year. And so I started incorporating little things that, over time make a real big difference. Um, what are the other small ways that people can prepare for MPA over the course of a year? Philip, you want to go first?
Sure. I could probably take up the rest of the time. And I'm sure Mekel probably could too. For me, I think getting the right people in your room sooner rather than later. There's a great Hugh Laurie quote about waiting till we're ready, and we're never going to be ready, so now's the time, kind of thing. He says it much more eloquently than that, but I've been able this winter to convince people to let me come into their rooms in January, particularly younger teachers, so that we can make sure they have the right music that works with their students, and then we can sit down together and go, okay, this is the right music. And here's what needs to happen when you're doing your daily warm-up. Here's what you need to do in your ensemble technique exercises to hopefully help you be more successful with that music come March. When you go into a class, 2 or even 3 weeks before, you can do some things, but unfortunately there's some things, if they've selected the wrong music, particularly with middle school groups, it's kind of hard to step back if the music's too difficult or it just isn't a good fit for the groups. I love W.C. Lanning's quote, "Teach music, not tunes." I don't think I ever went quite as far as he did, but because he taught music literacy to his kids from day one, in August, I mean, he would have 5 or 6 pieces. Now, this is high school, but he'd have 5 or 6 pieces in the folder, and they wouldn't decide which pieces they were going to do until maybe 2 or 3 weeks out, just kind of which pieces rose to the top that were working. I'm afraid so many people try to start their music so early, and they sacrifice teaching the concepts and the literacy part. Another quote that I think is attributed to Abe Lincoln, if I have 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. And sometimes I go in a band room and they're trying to chop down the tree with a dull axe, and they're playing pieces and they've never played that scale. Oh, it's minor, it's Dorian, but we haven't talked about that tonality, or we haven't played that scale. And the kids can do that. It's just they have to be, they have to be taught that. So I think for me, sort of that's a big picture is, one, picking the right literature, and that's so difficult to do. And I'm really sort of on the bandwagon right now. Will you just try this for one concert cycle? Just program everything less and see what happens. See how you feel, see how they feel. You can actually shape phrases and make music and do all those things without chasing notes. But in general, I think just thinking about teaching literacy, not just the tunes, and making sure the music's appropriate for the group, and getting people in your room earlier. Don't wait till you think they're ready. And that's particularly difficult for young teachers. It was for me. It still is for me. But I try to really say now, the best bands in the state that I know, the grade 6, the Masterworks, the whatever, they have people in their room a lot. They have sectional people in their room. Now, they probably have the budget to do that maybe more than other people do, but you can't, if budget's an issue, that's another conversation. But if you're just waiting because you don't think your kids are ready, don't do that. You've got to get people in your room.
Very good. Mekel?
Yeah, I was going to say the selection of repertoire isn't guaranteeing success, but the selection of improper repertoire will guarantee failure. And there's been so many times where I've looked, somebody will, and grade two encompasses a wide variety, as does grade three, and there's stuff that's composed in the old 1950s or 60s style, that has four horn parts in grade three, but it's also in the same category as Trails of Glory or something that's, on the easier side of it. And so you have to know the music. You really have to know the music, and you have to know your band. And I would say a lot of it's common sense, but it's amazing how much common sense doesn't come into play sometimes. I'll see people when I judge events or something, I'll see somebody that has, they're playing a piece with 8 percussion parts and they've got 4 percussionists.
Yes.
And so all of those timbres are missing, or they'll have something completely, they'll have a band of 95 and yet they're playing a childhood hymn, which is always piano or mezzo piano, and the 30 trumpets on stage are waiting forever to come in. That type of thing. It's like, okay, so you like the piece, okay, nice, but that's not doing the best thing for your group necessarily. And so I think that knowing your group, obviously, but also making sure you pick the rep that I always think that everybody goes about a half a grade too hard. Not always, but a lot of times they do. I think marching bands do this too. I know this isn't about marching bands, but it's like if you could just take down the difficulty level, like 10%, 25%, you'll be able to do the musical concepts that make it great. My goal was never to play the most complicated program. Every single time we've ever been, it's always been in grade 2, and I'm fine with that. But my goal wasn't to put the hardest program out there. It was to put the cleanest program out there. And if that means going a tiny bit technically less difficult in order to bring out your abilities to do phrasing and dynamic contrast and make it actually a piece of music rather than, a technical exercise, and, then I find that to be much more effective. And then those concepts transfer to harder music when you do it in the spring. I'm talking about this and Beethoven's looking over my shoulder. I didn't know that was there. Like, wait a minute. That was rather daunting. I just noticed. Anyway. But yeah, I just think the selection of rep is important, and have somebody that's been there before help you choose your repertoire.
Yes.
And before, and absolutely have them come in afterwards, and I like I always had, I don't care how many plaques were on the wall, I always had people from the area come in. Stephanie Tomberling, Leslie Craven, they all came and saw me, and then I went to see them, and we're all throwing because sometimes you just hear it so many times, you don't hear what's going wrong. Or not wrong, but, something that could be done better, but you just haven't heard it because you've heard it the same way 1,000 times already. Then somebody else who hadn't heard it yet comes in, oh, wait, have you tried this? Oh, okay.
A good example of that, John Mooney, who was a really good band director in Davidson County in the 70s, early 80s, used to always say, would call it contests, right, back then, right. But he would always say, we could all raise our rating a grade level if we just all switch bands 2 weeks before we go. Because you'd be hearing that group with fresh ears. I mean, we remember when they read, and compare that to where they are 2 weeks out, and it's so much better. But like Mekel's just saying, our ears sort of get accustomed to that sound, and when fresh ears come in and hear it, they hear things that maybe we've grown accustomed to.
Yeah, and it goes beyond wrong notes. I mean,
yes,
it's there's a lot of times where all the notes are right and all the rhythms are right, and then I think I said this to Ed Whitener. I know we're dropping names a lot. Paul McCartney told me never to name drop, but I told him, I said, listen, the 96% is easy. Getting it 96% clean, that's easy. It's that other 4%, and that has nothing to do with notes and rhythms or, you know, anything else. It's all the nuances and, you know, having the music actually have purpose. And I got to be honest, that really opened up more once I started composing myself. And all of a sudden, I'm digging really deep into how other people write, you know. And I know we all have our favorite composers that are contest friendly or not, you know, depending on your own band, and that's fine. But yeah, it just amazes me when I start doing, you know, a motivic analysis of, even in middle school. Oh yeah, that's a rondo that they did there. So you want to bring this out and bring that out and do, you know, and it says fanfare on it, but it's a rondo. You know what I'm saying? And when you dig deep like that and see the overall form, you see what the composer's trying to do, and then you can make your band do those things, and it makes it much more effective.
Yeah, I was in a session with Brian Balmages at one point. I don't remember the location, but he was talking about working with a group, and um, the director had missed something really obvious. And he's like, dude, did you read my program notes in the piece? And, you know, a lot of times we don't, maybe you skim over it the first time and you don't go back to it or something, but there's usually some, the composer put it there for an important reason. So if it's there, you probably should be doing it. So, yeah, sometimes we just miss the obvious. What are some other things you do with score preparation or just paperwork when you've prepared for MPA? The things maybe we don't talk about as much.
Turn everything in early. Order your scores early, turn in your registration early, get your bus request early, do everything as early as you possibly can. Tracy, I know you're loving hearing this. But yeah, because there's always, one, your admin is going to love you more for that. And two, you're going to have fewer problems messing you up, later on. I know that sounds really, really basic, but do everything early. That'd be the first thing I'd say.
Phillip?
Yeah, it's more just practical things. I mean, making sure you have buses and that kind of thing. Particularly now, it's so difficult to get drivers. It's so difficult to get buses. You have to think about all the non-musical things. I would, if I could, really more. I guess it's more a rehearsal idea, but it's one of those things I wish I'd figured out 20 years ago or even 10 years ago when I was teaching. But making sure students understand their listening responsibility. When I go into a lot of rooms, the directors say, "Oh, that's piano," or "That's forte," or "Trombones, you're too loud," or something like that. But that doesn't really give them enough information. And it took me a while to sort of be able to put this in terms. But I just did this with the middle school group in the Northwest District this weekend, and I think it really did work well. I mean, I've only been able to share it in classes, so I don't really know. I mean, going into a classroom, so I felt pretty confident that this would work, but I never really had a group to try it with. But in 2 days, literally with them, it did, and I think it's explaining to the kids. Okay, at bar 9, we have to hear the flutes. Let me back up just a little bit. So I typically say to the kids, the dynamic on your page is not for you. It's for us. If it says forte on your music, then we need to sound forte. If the trumpets are playing above the staff, if the flutes are playing high Cs, maybe you can't play forte and still be in the band still be in balance. And the reverse of that is clarinets. If you're playing below the staff and it says piano, that P means power. Play loud. But no, sort of understanding that about dynamics, and then from section to section, and sometimes it changes from phrase to phrase. Okay, at 9 we need to hear the flutes, but 4 measures later the horns come in with something else. Now we need to hear the horns, and have the kids write that in their parts. Or if it is them, make sure they know it's them. And what I explain to the groups I go into work with is, look, if you do that, and then you go play it in the gym, you're going to have a better chance of sounding good. If you go out on the field and play, you're going to have a better chance of sounding good. When you go to the stage you've never played on for MPA, or maybe you've been once and it was a year ago and you don't know, if you know who to listen to, you're going to have a better chance of playing with better balance. And if you play with better balance, the pitch is going to be better. The tone is, so many other things on the sheet are going to be better. And the judges are going to appreciate that. And sometimes we just assume the kids know what to listen for, and particularly with middle school, but really with high school too, as we get into more advanced music, they don't. And so sort of a big thing for me right now is listening responsibility, and making sure the kids know all the way through all the pieces what their listening responsibility is. And even yesterday morning, as we were rehearsing before our concert, we'd stop at a spot and I would say, what's your listening responsibility? And because they had their pencils and had written it in, they all said it. And it's, you know, even though they had it on the page, I had to remind them, they're still middle school, right? But everything was better about the performance. So I think that's a key thing. And if I could, just one more thing, because it's sort of the listening thing. We all talk about the Macbeth pyramid of sound and listening down and that sort of thing. I can't remember. It was at a session somewhere of an amazing band, but they talked about the degrees of listening, and basically having three. So first you have to make sure your sound is a good characteristic sound and is the right partial and the right pitch and that kind of thing. And then the next responsibility is your neighbor, and did your sound good with your neighbor? And then we can go the next step to listen across the ensemble or listen down in the ensemble. And I think a lot of directors, young and old, try to jump to the third one, and the kids are not really matching their neighbor yet. And so for me, again, this seemed to work well this weekend, and it seems to work even when we do it in a class setting. I usually try to have them listen up the section. So if the first chair player is 4 people down to my right, I'm listening to the person to my right. That's the only person I'm listening to. Does my sound good with their sound? And then obviously the first chair person's either listening to the person beside them, or sometimes they may need to listen to the person behind them, but you give everybody one person to listen to. And it is amazing how different the ensemble sounds immediately when they just listen to that one person. And, you know, if they get to where they're doing that pretty consistently, then you can talk about that next step of listening somewhere else in the ensemble. But I think we skipped that step, and that's not, I didn't come up with that. I just learned it at some point. But I think that really does work. And from grade 2 to grade 6, it seems to make a huge difference in the rooms I'm going into.
That's
I could take a tiny bit of a right turn on something here. You were talking about just other things that people don't tell you. There's 2 pet peeves of mine when I'm judging. Okay. One of them is when people take them. This is mainly middle school. Okay. But it's number one, when people take a march that's not a march.
yeah.
I can't tell you how many times they'll have the first number on there, and just because it's got march in the title doesn't mean it's a march, quite frankly, you know, or that it's an appropriate march. You know, I can't even remember what it's called, March of the Garden Gnomes or something like that. That's a comedy piece. You don't take that to an MPA event, you know, but because it had the word march in it, apparently, you know, that's number one. Number 2 is, I hope somebody sees this somewhere. The idea that you have to play one of your pieces be an entirely lyrical piece, that is a myth. I don't know why people are coming out of college thinking that one of their pieces has to be a ballad. It doesn't. And quite frankly, it shouldn't. I've taught 28 years without never playing a slow piece. Now, I have, you know, pieces that have maybe 8 or 10 bars of a slow introduction or something like that, just to prove that you can, you know, hold a phrase or whatever. But you know, it's almost a guarantee if you play something completely lyrical, it's one of the most dangerous things that you can possibly do. If you want to teach them to play lyrical, okay, fine, do it in the fall or the spring. But I just don't see the logic in doing Chorale from Jupiter, or something that's 100% lyrical, and people do it because they think they have to. And I'm like, no, they don't. They want contrast, not, contrast means many things, and that's just a little habit there. It's like, oh, you sabotage the whole thing with that second number or whatever. At least they put it second. They end with the
right.
Well,
if I could even add to that, I mean, so many of the grade 2, 3, and even into the 4, I mean, there's a lyrical middle section and an ABA
sure.
thing or whatever. That's fine, and you can teach those concepts in that. But also, if what fits your band, I mean, you probably don't want to do 2 pieces by the same composer, unless it's Mekel Rogers. Then you should do a march but no.
As long as they buy them, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's right. No, obviously you probably don't want to do that, but I guess it's somewhat playing the game. But if they're 2 pieces and maybe they're somewhat similar, but your band really sounds good on them, then the judges are going to go, wow, the tone's really nice. This is really nice. You're making good music. These may be a little bit too much alike, but you really sound good. Right. Okay, that's better than what Mekel's saying, oh, I'm trying to do this complete lyrical thing. And occasionally we're surprised. I've seen groups come in and do that. And, you kind of open the score, like Mekel said, and you're thinking, okay, good luck. I'm pulling for you. And then they actually do it. And that's great. But
absolutely.
But particularly if you've not been before or you're a younger teacher, I agree completely. There's nothing that says you have to do that.
Yeah.
That is true. A couple other things that are easy things that when we're trying to hear our band, sometimes when you're conducting, I don't know, maybe your ears don't work as well. But if you just get off the podium and walk around the room and listen to different sections, and if you need somebody to conduct, have a student do it so you can get off. Or if you've got somebody else in your room, it makes a huge difference to listen to those sections. And one of the things that I found really useful, there was nothing more sobering than making a recording of the group and, and then reviewing it. And I loved it when Remind, which is the texting service for school groups, they added the functionality of you can add an attachment or a file, and then I could send it and the kids could look at it over the weekend or overnight, and it saved so much time. So they're really easy things you can do to make it much more efficient. What do you suggest younger band directors do to find people, or people new to the state do to find people that can listen to their bands?
Well, first of all, find the person in your county that's the most experienced or has a band. There's 2 things with this. One is that I've noticed that a lot of the successful band directors, they have their own sound. If you had a Stephanie Tomberlin band at Porter Ridge play 3 pieces, and then a Weddington band at Mekel Rogers play the exact same 3 pieces, they would sound like 2 different bands. They'd both be equally good, okay? But she brings out things that I don't, and I bring out things that she doesn't. Neither of us are right or wrong. It's just the way to, and, I put a lot of emphasis on my bass instruments, and, that's just the way I do things. And my trumpets are always going to be, not as good because I always put the good trumpets on horn. But anyway, and then her clarinet sound, you can't beat her clarinet sound over at Porter Ridge. It's she's a clarinetist, it makes sense. But the point is that there won't be any weak links there. But if you can find the sound that you're looking for, one, that helps you with your repertoire, because you can figure out what things to highlight or whatever, Sweeney's famous for doing clarinet features that aren't features. They're in the, there's like eight or 10 bars of something that, just really makes your clarinet sound dynamite. He does low brass the same way, does some really good stuff there. So that's one thing. And Ruth, I'm 51 now. You have to remind me what the question was. Before I say.
Just the things that we do to make sure that we have people in our room listening.
Oh, yeah.
How to find them.
Sorry. It jogged my memory. Yeah. The other thing, and I tell all of my student teachers this, and all of the first year, second year band directors, you got to get out and ask questions quick, because there's only a short period of time where you as a professional are not expected to know what you're doing. And if you waste that time by thinking that you can't admit that you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get 5 years, 6 years in, still not know what you're doing. And then people are going to start saying, what's wrong with you or whatever, because you're not expected to know anything those first couple of years necessarily. You got to fall down a couple of times, right? But the more you ask questions immediately, and the more you realize you don't know something, the more information you get from somebody else, then you'll beat that curve, So don't be afraid to get out and ask. And I have to admit, I was one of those that actually, could have saved myself a heaps of trouble, because I had, when I started in Union County, I was the youngest director, and we had Tim Brewer and Tim Carpenter and Barry Howard and Jim Hill, and we had all those guys, and Rachel Clark, not leaving out the ladies, and Stephanie over at Monroe. So I mean, we had great people to talk to, and I felt so intimidated. They didn't make me feel this way. I made me feel this way. That I didn't feel like I could admit that I didn't quite know what I was doing, and I'm here to say, in the beginning, nobody knows what they're doing. And the more you ask questions, the quicker you learn.
Very true. Phillip, how about you?
Yeah, sure. I would just add to that. The qualities I think I hope people are looking for is, one, somebody that's been successful. If like we're talking MPA right now, so somebody that sort of walked that road and done that well. I agree with the things that Mekel said about, like for me, of course, he was right down the road, but I liked the way Ed Kiefer's band sounded at East Davidson. It wasn't safe. They were going for it. They were putting lots of air through the horn. I wanted a band to sound like that, And so Ed was a mentor that became a great friend and peer. I taught both his kids along the way. So I guess he didn't have a choice but to help me be somewhat successful. He wanted his kids to do well. But I think identifying that person, it's also got to be somebody that's going to tell you the truth. And sometimes that's uncomfortable when you're in somebody's room. But there are people that can do that, but then they can't tell you what to do about it. And I just, without any names or anything, it was several years ago, but I was going to work with the group, and a younger director who was doing very good stuff at their school was starting to go out and work with other groups, and had gone to work with this group. And so I knew that. So I called them and I said, "Hey, how'd it go?" And they said, "Well, they're doing this piece and it's not really happening, and something. And I said, "Well, what did you say?" And they said, "Well, I wasn't really sure what to say." And so I felt like it was a teachable moment for me with them. I said, "Look, you can't go do this if you're not going to be honest. You've got to tell them what because you hopefully we'd rather hear it now than when we're coming off the stage." And so I think those things are important. Somebody that's been successful, somebody that will be honest with you, and then I think this is the harder part to find. I think there are a lot of people that can identify the things, but then they can't tell you, "Okay, now here's what we need to do." And by we, I mean you and your kids. As far as resources, I mean, obviously ASBDA. I mean, somebody can reach out to any of us in ASBDA. Reach out to I would reach out to your district officers in the NCBA. folks, there are lots of resources. And I'd really like to see us, and I'm sort of pushing for this with the mentor thing. And I've kind of done this year sort of on my own with some new teachers, is kind of saying, how are things going? Great. When does your class meet? Oh, it's at 2 p.m. Well, I'm going to be coming through your area next Tuesday. I'm going to swing by. Not waiting for them to ask. And once I'm in the room and they realize it's a friendly atmosphere, and they really can, like Mekel said, take advantage of this time when you do need that help, even if you don't know you need it. I've got about 4 new teachers right now, and I think I've probably been in their room 6 or 8 times this year already. And now we're at the point of, so when can you come back? When are you coming again? Or they call. Well, no, they don't call. They text, right? Nobody. If they're under 30, that nobody calls anymore, which is fine. But they're texting and saying, hey, I'm dealing with this. Where can I go? So I think we, as the more mature teachers, well, I shouldn't say mature, the more veteran can make. I know, right? Not the mature part, but I think we've got to reach out and say, hey, let's do this together. And that's on us. And even when we started the mentor program with NCMEA, oh gosh, she's at Michigan. I'm drawing a blank now on her name. She's phenomenal. She wrote several books on mentoring teachers. But the mentee book is about 6 by 9, okay, in spiral bound. The mentor book is 9 by 12 and probably twice as thick. And the point I used to try to make with the mentor folks, and even sort of jokingly to the mentees, is we have a lot more to learn about how to be the mentors than they do about how to be the mentees. And I still think that's where we are. I think we've made great progress, but I still think we've got a lot to learn to be there for these new teachers. So that's kind of a lot to answer your question, but I think those are the important things for me.
You're right on about that with the mentoring, and that's really cool what you're doing with those newer teachers. So it's appreciated, Phillip. Let's spend the last few minutes diving into the sight reading process. And what things did you find that were successful? What things, Cal, have you adjudicated sight reading?
Yes, once. I can't remember what district. It might have been Northwest. To be quite honest, well, first of all, and I always tell, I did a study ways back where I just took all of the MPA records, because I was having all of these anxiety issues over sight reading as well. And that's the one thing that most directors that are young agonize about, because it's the unknown factor. And I went through and I put down every single possible combination of stage grade and sight reading grade, and then calculated what percentage of those combinations either helped your overall score, didn't affect it at all, or hurt your overall score. 67% of the sight reading combinations affected the stage score, not one bit.
Right.
30-something% brought it up. And there's only one combination of numbers where it goes down. And that's if you go 1, 1, 2, and a 3 in sight reading. Mm-hmm. That's the only combination where you lose a grade of some kind or type. Okay. Now, when you realize that less than 1% of the of the sight reading is going to affect your overall score, then it takes the pressure off. Now, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it does take the pressure off of trying to do it. Then the other thing is that I've seen so many bands that come in to do sight reading. The sight readings in B flat, or the sight readings in E flat concert, they do their warm-up scale, it's B flat concert, because that's the only one they know. Mm-hmm. Or whatever, that's the one they're comfortable on. I'm like, yeah, okay. That's one thing. Number two, I've seen I'm not going to mention the band, but I did see them have a prayer circle right before they started, which was fun. And I've seen situations where they let the kids look at it for a minute or whatever, and then start taking questions for another minute or so. And I'm like, if you want to do that, that's fine. I found the best thing to do, especially at the middle school level, is just get in there and start tizzling. And then while they're tizzling, I start talking and say, watch out for this, there's that, this, that. Because my logic is, if you're taking the time to answer a question, you're answering one kid's question. You're taking up 30 seconds to answer that one kid's question, and you're wasting the time of the other 40 that you've got in the room, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So that would be something. Just get in there and tizzle right away, and the more opportunity you have, then do it. The second thing is, or the third thing, I don't know what I'm on now, but can you see what my class is like? It's just like an endless cul-de-sac of thoughts, that I just get back in and then get on the main road again. But yeah, the other thing is that I've seen bands come in that haven't told their percussionists what they're supposed to be playing, and there'll be kids that'll argue over which one's going to then cover the snare drum part on the sight reading, like in the sight reading room. It's like, really, different things like that, and it's just and quite frankly, the best way to learn how to sight read is just do it a lot. Do it a lot and don't waste any time doing it. And I always tell everybody that there's usually one major thing that you need to look out for. Whatever this, and again, I'm on the middle school. The high school might be completely different, but in middle school, there's one major thing. Like, it'll be an easy key, an easy time signature, but some chromatic notes, or it'll be, everything, notes, rhythms, everything's going to be simple, but there's one sharp in the key, or whatever. There's usually one thing that they're trying to see if you get, at least that's what I've found. And if you get that one thing in general, it's all right, but just I train the kids to look for that one thing.
Yeah, I would agree with all those things. The question thing, we used to tell our students, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. The judge is going to ask you if you have any questions. You don't have any questions.
Exactly. Yeah.
The judge is not impressed if you ask kids questions. Oh, what key is this in? Oh, well, what is it? No, you just tell them. It's the best use of your time. Now, obviously, if they have a wrong part, then you have to deal with that. If something's wrong in their folder or whatever, or their instrument's not working. But other than that, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. And I agree with Mekel. If you want to give them a little bit of time to look at it while you're looking for that major issue, that's fine. But typically, particularly if you're under grade 4, you can start tizzling or whatever you do right away, and you'll identify those things as you're going through, and then there'll be plenty of time to go back and have explain those things after you've done the tizzling the first time. The other thing I've started asking directors to consider doing is now there are years and years of UIL past sight readings, but instead of you just spending all your budget on that, you're probably never going to program those. But within your district, if there are 5 or 6 high schools or 5 or 6 middle schools, if everybody buys 1 or 2, and then you just share them all, to practice sight reading, then all of a sudden you have multiple sight readings that you can use, that you bought as a district. And then you should be, that it gives you a more simple idea, I guess, or more accurate idea of what's going to happen in the room. And I definitely agree with Mekel on the percussion thing. Everybody is told ahead of time what the percussion instruments are going to be on what they're reading. You need to have those assigned before you walk in the door. And then there's no question. So, I think that's important as well. And if I could sort of jump back, Ruth, to just one more thing that I've seen a few groups do that I think is such a great idea, and particularly as difficult as it is to get buses and different things like that now, is they're not as many as I wish there were, but some schools are doing what they call in-house field trips. And so basically they have a whole day that they basically can have a mini camp on their campus. and they can have people come in to do sectionals, or they can have a guest conductor to come in to work with their groups. And it's a field trip. You fill out the field trip forms, you do everything you normally have to do. You feed them pizza at lunch, you do, whatever, but they stay on campus. And that's also a great opportunity to teach your administration more about, or educate them more about what the event is and what's going on. But the folks that I know that have done that, I think their administration really loves seeing that happen. And yes, the kids are kind of getting a field trip, but they're not having to go anywhere. So financially, it's much easier to do. And it's just a good use of time, I think. So I think if your administration would allow that, that's really something to consider. And again, I would do that sooner rather than later. I mean, I know we're well into the process this spring, but certainly in planning for next year, that might be something to think about.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We are out of time. Mekel and Phillip, would you like to share one last thought that you feel like anybody needs right now, with what we have, a month, I guess, until MPA, a little less?
My one thing would be, don't take it too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from my wife right there. Because she, on Facebook, when everybody in early March or late February is talking about, oh gosh, this is coming up, this da 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 da, and she said, she looked at me. Now she teaches kindergarten, right? And she looked at me and she said, "Do y'all have to do this? Do y'all have to go to this event? Is it required?" And we're like, "No." And she said, "Well, why do you do this to yourself every year?" And I had to think about that for a second. And so, but my final thought would be, one, don't take it too seriously. The kids are going to forget about it 2 days after, And if you have, and if you want to do it, then absolutely do it, but never feel pressured to do it. If you don't want to, don't go. The world's not going to end. It's going to be totally fine. Because your health is more important. Nobody looks at the end of their career and looks back and says, I wish I had gone more.
Right.
Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Because now I'm towards the end of that career, and I can safely say I am not thinking, I wish I had done MPA more. No.
I think for me, I would just reiterate, if wherever you are in the process, if you're planning to go, but you're concerned that it's not going to be a net positive for your group from a rating standpoint, go for comments. All the kids know is what we tell them. Just a quick example: kids coming into NCSSM would come from all over the state, some from really good programs. And when they were trying to decide, they would always ask, "Oh, well, what grade music do you play?" And I stumbled over that for quite a while, but I finally arrived at my answer to that was quality. We play meaningful music that's quality music. And of course, then they kind of would have that deer in headlights look a little bit. When they were visiting, that would be my answer. But on the first day of class, I would explain that a little bit more, and I would say to them, it's not your fault that you're asking that question. It's our fault that you're asking that question. And again, certainly not holier than thou. I've been as guilty of that as anybody. But you can't let the grade or the difficulty of the music determine whether you're successful or not. Some of the best bands I've ever judged were middle schools playing grade 2 or high schools playing grade 4 and 5, but they played the mess out of it. They made music. They weren't just chasing notes and rhythms. So, it's probably a little late for this year to think about changing music, but I think ultimately you have to decide what's going to make this experience in March a net positive for my group. And then you have to do whatever it is that's good for them and for you, and not worry about what everybody else is going to say. And just quickly, one other thing I was hoping to share at some point is, years ago, I really thought the sight reading thing was important. And I'm glad we did it, but kind of like Mekel's comment with how does it really affect anything? I think it's probably more important for you to make sure, if at all possible, that your kids hear other kids play. Your kids don't want to play just for the bus drivers and 3 judges and a couple of parents. You know, they want to have an audience, but they're going to learn more or as much by doing that as anything else they do that day. And maybe more importantly, sir.
And so will the director.
Of course. But I think maybe even more importantly than anything is they're going to see, hey, there are other kids that doing what I'm doing. And that may be the difference in them staying in the program or not. So if you can stay as long as you can stay or get there early and hear as many bands as you can, that's a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win for the kids on the stage. It's a win-win for your kids. We would sometimes even create sort of a simplified judges sheet and ask them to just fill out some things. And then when we got home, we'd have conversations about the band we heard. What a great learning opportunity that is for them, you know, when they get to sort of be the judge, if you will. So those are just a couple of final thoughts that I hope are helpful.
Definitely. Mekel, Phillip, thank you so much for volunteering to do this tonight and sharing your pearls of wisdom. I was sitting here taking notes as well, so thank you very much. Tracy, Tom, and Dee, thank you for being here tonight. And for those of you who watch this recording, we hope this helps you in the coming weeks and in future years. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks. Thanks for putting this together, Ruth.
You are welcome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ruth.